Municipality of the County of Kings. Today's Thursday. It is May 22nd, 2025. The hour is 1 p.m. and we'll call the meeting to order. My name is Councillor Emily Lutz and I'm the chair of the Planning Advisory Committee. Welcome to everyone who's joining us this morning. At this point, we will take roll call, and I'd ask that we set up the vote and everybody indicate their presence on their electronic PIN pad at their leisure. We have two regrets today, both from Riley Peckford, who was deputy mayor here at the municipality and appointed by council, and Logan Morse, who is a citizen member. So with that, two absences, we still have quorum and are safe to proceed. At this point in the agenda, item 3 is amendments to the agenda. You'll notice that item 8C has been removed from this month's agenda to be considered at a later date. That is the application to enter into a development agreement to permit a tourist commercial use on Greenfield Road. So that will not be discussed today. We will be discussing that at another date. Are there any other amendments to come before the agenda today? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if it's this committee or if it should go to another committee of the whole. I still think we need a conversation on the UARB decision around the Scotts Bay campground. I think there are learnings there that we should be aware of because they may inform our processes or decision making going forward through PAC. But I'm not sure if that's an agenda item for this committee or for a broader meeting at a later date. Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we ask staff to maybe come back with a suggestion about where best to have that conversation, if that's okay with you, Councillor. We'll look to staff to mark that in somewhere in our calendars, whether it's June PAC, I'm trying to remember what month it is here, June PAC, or for all of council. Probably all of council would benefit from that discussion, but potentially a joint initiative with the PAC committee members. So we do have some additional meetings coming up about planning related things, so that might also be an opportunity to have that discussion. Okay, thank you for bringing it up. Any other amendments to the agenda? Any amendments? Seeing none at this point, I'd look for a motion to approve the agenda. Could I have a motion from committee? Moved by Kate, seconded by Councillor Gates. Thank you. All those in favor, or is there any discussion? All those in favor or otherwise, please signify in the usual fashion. Thank you. And just for those who may be new to the process, it's a 10-second delay between when the vote is called and by the time our votes show up on the screen. So if you're listening online and wondering what we're waiting for, it is that. So the motion is carried unanimously and the agenda is approved. At this point, does anyone have any conflict of interest issues with the items on the agenda today that they wish to disclose at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to item 6, approval of the minutes of April 8th, 2025. We met here in these chambers. Are there any items anyone wishes to discuss from the minutes of April 8th? Okay, I see none. Look for a motion to approve those agenda at the time. Moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor McPherson. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion on the motion to approve the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor or otherwise, please signify in the usual fashion. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The minutes are approved. There were no errors or omissions in those minutes. Is there any business arising from any business encapsulated within those minutes? Follow-up? Questions of clarification? Burning questions? No, none. Okay, moving on to item 8, business. We have a guest with us this morning, Paul Deck. Paul Deck is here from Upland Planning and Design Studio to give us a presentation on a draft subdivision bylaw and municipal specifications. So at this point, I will hand the floor over to you, and you should be good to go.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to present on a project that we've been working on with the municipality Since the beginning of last year, it's the update of the subdivision bylaw for the municipality of the County of Kings. So again, my name is Paul Datz, Upland Planning and Design, and we've been working on this project with the engineers from Design Point. So let us remind ourselves quickly where the subdivision bylaw stands in the framework of planning documents. First of all, the main governing document for land use planning in the municipality is the Municipal Planning Strategy, which takes its authority from the Provincial Municipal Government Act. And the Municipal Planning Strategy provides policy for two documents which implement much of the day-to-day planning issues in the municipality, which is the Land Use Bylaw and the Subdivision Bylaw. So the Municipal Planning Strategy and the Land Use Bylaw were just recently fully reviewed and have been in place for a couple of years now. Well, the Subdivision Bylaw is in its original form 30 years old right now, so it was very much in need of an update and a review. However, it is important to keep in mind that policies set by the Municipal Planning Strategy in many cases still apply to the subdivision bylaw. So the planning strategy has already set some of the tracks for decisions to be implemented by the subdivision bylaw. That's important to keep in mind when we, for instance, review some of the feedback we received during the public engagement. So the subdivision bylaw is connected to the land use bylaw through a couple of elements. Most importantly, the zoning, which through the planning strategy and land use bylaw is in place for a piece of property, also influences how that lot can be subdivided. Most importantly, the minimum lot area and lot frontage standards from the land use bylaw carry over to the subdivision and are implemented through the subdivision bylaw, but also a couple of other higher level decisions, such as if public roads, for instance, can be created in a certain area of land. That's also set by the zone, and that's also another thing that was already determined during the review of the planning strategy and land use bylaw. So let's recap the public engagement that has been happening on this project. It's a very technical project, so the public engagement are not as wide and long as you remember it from the planning strategy and land use bylaw review. It was more focused, took place in the months of January to March of last year. There were a couple of dedicated in-person stakeholder sessions, one with developers, one with surveyors and engineers. And then there was an in-person public information session. All happened here at the back of this council chambers. And there was also an opportunity to send in online feedback via email that was advertised as such. And the results from these engagement activities were such. First of all, one slide on the general feedback from the public that is not professionally involved in subdivision in any way. Well, due to the nature of how technical subdivision is, it was honestly sometimes a little challenging to keep those conversations on track, right? Because it's understandable, it's not easy to, it's not very intuitive. That whole subject. So yeah, but from the feedback that we got, there were some mixed opinions about private roads. Should they be allowed or shouldn't they be? Some people spoke up that it would be nice to have more of them because they're a cheap way of constructing, but others highlighted that it's that they can create issues down the road, right? When maintenance issues come up and ownership of such roads is not clear. So it was definitely mixed feedback about that topic of conversation. There was some discussion about right-of-way standards, so how wide should roads be and how many features should these right-of-way standards include. And there was also some discussion about cluster housing development, which is kind of more related to the planning strategy and land use bylaw, but it has also come up, so we've documented that. In the discussions of developers, developers mostly ask for some of existing regulation to be waived. A lot of the feedback received there was also more so related to decisions that have been already taken during the planning strategy review. But just to summarize what we heard, there was a desire to widely permit private roads in most of the municipality. There were questions about potential of cost-sharing agreements with the municipality for road construction, asking for more flexibility with the interpretation of growth boundaries, and there was also some comments about the lack of capacity in Hans border and if that could be addressed. And finally, from professionals that work with the subdivision bylaw on a daily basis, what we heard there is that an update of the municipal engineering specifications, which is a document kind of attached. It's a sort of an attachment to the subdivision bylaw, a set of engineering practices on how to create new roads and new public infrastructure. They just kind of reiterated that there is an urgent need to update those, which is not a surprise because they're 30 years. Well, there have been some update, but also with the subdivision bylaw, originally they were adopted 30 years ago. A lot of clarification of procedures, clarification of engineering requirements. So these 3 points is something that we really were able to respond to with the review of these documents. You'll see that in particular in the slides about the municipal service systems specifications manual. There is a lot more detail and a lot more clarity on what's required in terms of engineering standards now. Which should also address the next point, the reduction of approval timelines. More clarity should make it easier for the municipality to approve subdivisions as well. And surveyors also reiterated that point from developers that they would like to see more private roads permitted in the municipality, but that's again more of a municipal planning strategy discussion. So let's have a look at the new subdivision bylaw that we're proposing as a result of the work of the last year and a half. So first of all, we're creating a completely new structure of the bylaw. The old document was a little difficult to follow. It had a general requirements section at the beginning, which was a bit of a mixed bag. There were a lot of different requirements in there. Now there's a very clear structure, starting first of all with an administrative part, part 1, which just describes where the authority of this bylaw is coming from, how the administration works. So most professionals, for instance, dealing with this bylaw don't really need to look into that section. They would be more interested in section 3, which are lot requirements. So everything that's required to lots and their geometry and in which cases they can be created is in there. Road development has received a completely separate section, section 4. So for instance, if somebody is just subdividing lots without creating a new road, they know they don't need to look into that section anymore. And similarly, public open space has received its own section. And then there is a whole part 3 with procedure. So if someone wants to know what do I need to include in my application for a plan of subdivision, they look into that part and everything's detailed in there. So it's a more clear structure, more intuitive, and it's easier to navigate now, this whole document. Other than that, generally the document is very technical, and because of that, there aren't as many changes as you may be used to from a planning strategy or land use bylaw that are like intuitive and that you maybe have experience with from, what kind of buildings, residential or commercial, can be put on certain lots. It's more about small corrections to certain provisions to make sure that like one little word doesn't prevent something from happening. Mostly what we were dealing with in the update of the subdivision bylaw is just to clean up all the old references. The old subdivision bylaw was still referencing the Planning Act, which doesn't exist anymore, right? It was replaced by the Municipal Government Act in 1995. Lots of references to zones that don't exist anymore, other things from previous planning documents. So Yeah, it was a real spring clean to go through that document, and a lot of it was just very administrative. The municipal engineer gets more powers and flexibility as part of this bylaw review. There is now often a section in the provisions about road creation, for instance, that some things are up to the discretion of the municipal engineer, which we hope should help with the flexibility of approving certain subdivisions. And the dedication of public land requirements have been tightened up because there were some loopholes in the old system, how people could get around paying these dedications or providing land for dedication, so that was clarified. So a couple of details that give you an impression of the type of changes we were going through. Some of the things that are new is that the performance bond for road construction, so the bond that developer needs to provide to the municipality that to guarantee that they will actually build the road to standards, increases from 120 to 150% and has a required duration of 24 months. Yeah, so it was 120 without a clearly specified duration before that. The municipal engineer may seek clarifications or revisions to the cost estimate that has been clarified and put into the bylaw draft. Where public roads can be extended, can be created, has been clarified. So anywhere in the growth center, growth centers are eligible for public road creation, and also the country residential A4 zone. Yeah, in the old bylaw there were still some references that made it confusing because they referred to some old zones that didn't exist anymore, so it seemed like maybe not everywhere in the growth center you would be able to subdivide. So now it's everywhere in the growth centers and the country residential A4 zone are all set for creation of public roads. And yeah, private roads can be still created in the shoreline and the tidal zones. But there is also a clarification that cul-de-sacs that only have one axis for road lengths of 230 meters and more, that there is a requirement for a second axis for emergency response, safety, active transportation, those reasons. There's not much that changes about the actual requirements of what lots need to look like. Still, primary requirements are rooted in the land use bylaw and the subdivision bylaw. Just a couple of things that are changing are that the possibility to subdivide a lot without complying with frontage of area requirements for 2 lots where existing dwellings are in place has been removed. There is some clarification around the rules for that in the S2 and A1 zones, only 1 lot per year can be subdivided. Specifically to the S2 zone, there was some confusion in the old bylaw that put in some reference to distance from waterways, which I think isn't the intent with the current municipal planning strategy. So it just goes by zone now. And there was a prohibition of double fronting lots in the old bylaw, which wasn't really clear to us, like why this was put in place back then. So we have removed that prohibition to create a bit more flexibility. Yeah, maybe the most interesting and biggest area of some changes to the subdivision bylaw text is in the area of open space dedication. So we have tightened up some loopholes, how it was sometimes possible to subdivide without paying, providing land or paying the in lieu fee for public land dedication. So going forward, the exemption will only apply to reconfigurations where property lines are changing but no new lots are created, where there are dwellings on the lot that were in existence before this bylaw was adopted, right? So if the newly proposed lot that is being created has one of these dwellings, if a remainder of the subdivision is less than 200% of the minimum lot area requirement, meaning if the remainder cannot be further subdivided, in that case, So that's actually the case, noticing that's a mistake on the slide. So in that case, it would be the fee or the requirement for a public land dedication would still apply for a remainder that cannot be further subdivided, while the exemption applies for remainders that are bigger than that because they may be subdivided at some point in the future. So at that point, that requirement would kick in. And execution of wills that were done before the year 2000, that's something that's carrying forward as well. More flexibility, we've integrated some more flexibility on dedication of natural heritage features and floodplains. So there were some provisions in there with regard to minimum size and how this dedication would work that made it difficult for the municipality to accept a floodplain, right, to protect an area from development, for instance, going forward. So that has been improved. And there is now a separate set of public dedication priorities for inside and outside of growth centers. For instance, inside growth centers, there is a stronger focus on the municipal planning strategy where new public spaces are being created. Inside growth centers, there is a prioritization of public lands around the fringe of the growth center to create a bit of a green belt and a buffer from agricultural activities. While outside of growth centers, the priorities are a little different, focusing more on access to waterways, for instance, shoreline. So that will be really helpful for the municipality to have this clarification, what kind of public lands to prioritize inside and outside of growth centers. So that pretty much closes the subdivision bylaw document itself, and then working hand in hand with the subdivision bylaw is the Municipal Service System Specification Manual. So that was the document prepared by the engineers from Design Point, replacing the old service system specification. And it is a very comprehensive overhaul. I mean, very technical, right? This kind of document goes into detail, how thick an asphalt layer and a pavement has to be, and how much gravel needs to be in the base of a road, and those kind of things. So I won't really go through all these details for what has been changed, but there is a lot. It's a very comprehensive update to these engineering requirements. They include all kinds of plans of subdivisions that involve creation of municipal infrastructure, concept plans, tentative plans, final plans. What's new is that with the final plans, there's the requirement for a closeout report, so kind of a checklist at the end of the process where the municipality and the developer make sure that everything that is actually required as part of road creation, for instance, is actually taken care of. I mean, pretty much any type of municipal infrastructure that can be created as part of a subdivision is covered with standards, whether it's roads, walkways, sidewalks, AT trails, the water and sanitary systems, and also the stormwater systems. They have been updated by reviewing up-to-date meteorological data, looking at typical storm frequencies and intensities and what that means in terms of how the stormwater infrastructure needs to be sized appropriately. We have two tables here. On the left, you can see the number or list of drawings that were included in the latest iteration of the service system specifications from 1997. You can see there were 9 drawings. In 2025, we have a lot more detail, right? Like the list on the right-hand side is significantly longer. You can see, details about, for instance, how to build a guardrail or active transportation trail, or details how a fire hydrant or precast head wall need to look like. It is something that the engineering community was asking for, to have more clarity in what they're designing, because it helps both sides when the engineers know what to design in a subdivision, and municipal public works staff know exactly what they're looking for and what to approve. It helps with timeline. It streamlines everything, increases clarity, and makes it also easier for the municipality to enforce if something's not up to standard, because it's clear what's required. And just a quick look on road specifications. So this is what a typical road cross section from 1997 looks like. Very minimalistic and just kind of one type of subdivision roads that was foreseen back then. Now in 2025, we have put that more into perspective with the diverse requirements of the municipality, because there are now areas, that have grown to become very different. There are very urbanized areas, there are rural areas, and then there's the so-called cottage country, right? That is where you see more of the private roads. So for each of these categories, you have now a dedicated section that describes in great detail with drawings what kind of infrastructure and construction methods are required for that kind of road type. And that covers the overview. So I'm looking forward to your feedback. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting. And there's so much detail in this document and this new bylaw. So appreciate the time you took to give us an overview. All right, so we have this time now for questions, if folks have any questions. Councillor Gates, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. A lot of information, thank you for that, and upgrading. And I had a chance to speak with a planner recently. When easements for utilities are put in a subdivision, sheds get built, fences get built over top of them. And down the road, I'm wondering if there's any way, I know easements aren't really looked at from the planning perspective, but when people build trees over top of sewer lines, it causes many problems, and that's something that I see. I'm wondering if there's any way that we can address those easements or clearly define the easements in a subdivision before we run into those problems. I know Trish may weigh in on it, but
Trish does have her light on.
thank you.
I'll take a stab at it first, Paul, through you, Madam Chair. So what the councillor is mentioning, I believe, is when easements are in play, and I think we'll limit our discussion to utility easements, so whether that's a village or us, the municipality, if there's a water line or a sewer line easement or even a drainage easement, what the councillor is getting at is sometimes there can be issues with ensuring that the rights of the easements are adhered to. The issue that we're really speaking of is a title issue, and it's not a subdivision bylaw issue, it's not a land use bylaw issue, it's a title issue. So it isn't something that we're able to implement into any of these documents. But yeah, we're all aware that they do exist.
It would just, I think would help if we had some way of delineating where those utilities are, so that a homeowner doesn't build a fence and then the utility service provider has to come in and remove those fences, and then it just causes,
Again, the municipality isn't the policer of people's property rights and burdens that may exist on their property. So it isn't an onus that a development officer would be able to undertake. Basically, you're asking for a title search for every permit. And there's lots of activities that occur that don't require permits, so we're still not involved. So it's still, the onus is on the holder of the easement to ensure that they are monitoring their own easements, but also the property owner has to be aware of the burdens upon their land.
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Thank you for that discussion. Councillor McPherson, go ahead.
Thank you very much. There seems to be an awful lot of work put into this, so I think it warrants some feedback and some commentary. So first and foremost, thank you very much. My thought is that we live in a beautiful part of this province, and we're under pressure for expansion, and people want to live in the valley, and rightfully so. And that means that there's a lot of pressure put on our infrastructure and our land, and therefore it's tremendous that we are updating our bylaws that govern how we use that property. What I'm wondering about is, I guess first of all, the fact that you have engaged a lot of the contributors and partners is important to get the feedback, and I appreciated that piece of it. When it comes to bylaws, my understanding is that they are municipal in nature. We have our own municipal bylaws, and I'm wondering about kind of the governance or guidance at a provincial level. We're obligated, evidently, to follow the MGA. And I'm just wondering, if I were in Cape Breton, Halifax, Pictou County, Yarmouth, or Kings County, would the bylaws around subdivision development be similar? Or would we see big differences?
Paul, go
Madam
ahead. Do you
Chair.
have experience in this area with the other municipalities' subdivision bylaws?
Yeah, through you to Councillor McPherson. Yes, I think the subdivision bylaw and their functioning would be very similar. I think coming back to what I mentioned at the beginning, the way the municipal planning strategy would lay out some of the higher level land use planning requirements, such as in what kind of areas can you create public roads, right? Where do we want to have development, and which land do we want to keep aside for resource uses and perhaps for some buffering of urban uses from agricultural uses, those kind of things. So those rules would vary widely across the province. But then the subdivision bylaw is such a technical document that's just, implementing these overarching principles that are set in the planning strategy, that the way the subdivision bylaw operates itself would be very similar across the province. Some differences will be in the municipal service system specifications, right? So that whole engineering part about what exactly goes into a public road. So those standards, of course, for like downtown Halifax, right, would be very different from a village, for instance. So there are some differences there in terms of what's typically required, but yeah, overall, to your question, they are similar.
Thank you, Mr. Dess. And Trish, I think, had her light on as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to add to Paul's response, the other guidance that municipalities have with subdivision bylaw is something that the province put out, so through municipal affairs, provincial subdivision regulations. So we are mandated to meet those as minimums. So we can't be less restrictive than what the province has already said, with a fair bit of what's in our bylaws really copying the regulations. So we've got a few little nuances within the document, but for the most part, building on the answer already given, is we don't really have much wiggle room, especially in rural municipalities like us, where a lot of what we talked about today assumed municipal streets and assumed services. A fair bit of our municipality has neither. So it's provincial roads, it's on-site septics, it's village infrastructure. So these documents, and I would say probably there's three. So there's the subdivision bylaw, the provincial regulations, as well as the municipal specs, and we've got Brad here to help us with any of those technical things. Those all work together, and those all tell us how we need to process and what kind of approvals we need, even on a one lot on Slayer Road, or wherever that might be within the municipality.
Okay, thank you, Trish. Councillor McPherson, did you have any follow-up? There you go.
I just appreciate both answers. It's really my own personal attempt to understand and to ensure that we are living and working, and I know we are because of the professionalism of our staff, but just that we're living and working within the confines of how subdivision should be developed. And the fact that we've upgraded this policy is really reassuring as well, so thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. It's always good to ask the question because sometimes the public are listening and they, it's always good to draw these things out. So I think it's great. Mr. Deal, question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to see this document's been updated, a lot of good stuff in it. And I tried to read it all. I don't know if I got through it all, but I believe there's one thing in growth centers for new subdivisions on public roads, the requirement for sidewalks. And if that does apply, does it apply for new subdivisions that will connect to existing sidewalk systems? Or is it only, like if there's no existing sidewalk system, will it be necessary in the subdivision? But either way, I think it's a good thing that it should be required because with active transportation, for the future, I think it's a good thing to add, sidewalks into all subdivisions that are being built, for the future.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Deal. The subdivision bylaw only has the ability to regulate forms of infrastructure in subdivisions that are newly created. So when somebody proposes to subdivide new lots on a new public road, then the subdivision bylaw tells them what they have to put in place. As far as existing subdivisions are concerned, that would have to be handled by the municipality outside of the subdivision bylaw. So there, some municipalities have their policies to upgrade older subdivisions. Of course, then it's a question, where do the funds come from, right, for those kind of projects? So so that's something, it's just generally existing infrastructure and its maintenance that's outside of the subdivision bylaw. Subdivision bylaw only looks at newly created roads and what the requirements are for those.
So just for clarity, so with new roads, there is a requirement for sidewalk?
Yeah, in growth centers, yes.
Yes. But is that for in all cases? For example, like if a subdivision is being created that connects to an existing roadway system that does not have a sidewalk, it still is required to have its own sidewalk in the subdivision for the future that could be connected to a more higher volume thoroughfare type of roadway, correct?
Yeah, I think the vision that was created through the municipal planning strategy for growth centers is that in the long term they will all have urban amenities, and part of it being a connected active transportation network. So even if at a given time there is no connection for a new street, that the intent would be through the planning strategy that in the long term that connection would be created, just with other tools, not through the subdivision bylaw. So which is the reason why, yes, in every case in a growth center a sidewalk would be required.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deal. Good follow-up. That's good clarity. And I had the same question, so thank you for asking it. Yeah, I too agree that it's a good idea to have sidewalks on new roads. There we go, the words. All right, any further questions? I'm sure you all read it to the letter, just like Mr. Deal, so. Nothing further? Okay. No further questions. So at this point, we'll look for the motions. Right. Okay. So we have a couple options for this motion. So essentially what we're doing now is just looking for planning advisory to create a motion that would direct a public participation meeting to be held regarding the new subdivision bylaw and municipal service system specification manual on June 10th at 1 p.m. prior to the next regular PAC meeting. So this is a public meeting, so folks would be invited to attend this meeting. And so the question is to PAC, does this timing suit you to have it at the same time as our next PAC? After which the regular business of PAC would happen. Is 1 p.m. a good time? Alternatively, 6 p.m. that evening could be a good time. We could do the morning of that day and have lunch. Just putting some options out there. So if folks have any thoughts, let me know right now. Otherwise, we'll proceed by having it at 1 p.m. on that day. I see some nods around the table. We're okay. No amendments required. All right. The motion reads that Planning Advisory Committee hold a public participation meeting regarding bylaw 113, subdivision bylaw, and the municipal service system specification manual on June 10th at 1 p.m. prior to the regular PAC meeting. Do I have a mover of the motion? Moved by Ms. Friars, seconded by Councillor Gates. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor or otherwise, please signify in the usual fashion. And thank you, Paul, for your presentation and all the work that you have put into this project over the last year or so, if I can gather from the timelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and the motion carries unanimously. So you'll hear more about this on June 10th at 1 p.m. Thank you. All right, so that concludes item 8A. We'll move now to 8B, an application to rezone the property at 836 Main Street, PID 551-22279, Kingston, from the general commercial C1 zone to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone. And it will be presented by Perry Bowman, planner here at the municipality, file 25-05. Perry, will you be presenting from there? Perfect. Welcome to Planning Advisory Committee. Yep, no rush. We're all still digesting the subdivision bylaws, so it's all good.
Hello. Okay. All right. Once again, please tell me if you can't hear me while I'm speaking. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are here to discuss a land use bylaw map amendment application or rezoning for 836 Main Street in Kingston. So this is our land use bylaw map amendment process. We received a completed application on the 10th of February 2025. No public information meeting was required for this application as the site is under an acre in area. So a staff review was undertaken. This included reaching out to the Kingston Village Commission and attending one of their meetings to receive feedback and comment on the application. As we no longer hold area advisory committee meetings. And we're now here at the Planning Advisory Committee. So following today's meeting, the recommendation will be forwarded to the full Municipal Council at first reading. At that first reading, Council will vote on whether to authorise a public hearing. If a public hearing is authorised, it will be held, and prior to that meeting, properties within 500 feet will be notified again by mail, potentially an alternate carrier to Canada Post, but they will get there. And then following that public hearing, there is second reading where the full Municipal Council will vote and make a decision on the application. And following that decision, there is a 14-day appeal period. So in terms of the proposal, the applicants have applied to rezone the subject site from the general commercial C1 zone to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone to permit the development of 2 4-unit dwellings. So the image on the screen is their hypothetical plan. However, as I will discuss later in the presentation, we have done or sent out the application for request for comments, and a few of those may suggest that potential changes may need to be made to this plan. But again, when we request a plan along with an application, we're more looking at what the intended land use is so that we can assess land use conflicts rather than what is actually on the page in front of us. So, this is a map of the County of Kings with the red circle indicating the approximate location of the subject site within the village of Kingston. So this is an aerial image of the subject site, which is outlined in red. The site has an area of 27,555 square feet and is located on the southern side of Main Street. It has approximately 80 feet of street frontage, and its southern boundary directly abuts the Kingston Rail Trail. At the moment, there is a old dwelling that's no longer, I guess, being inhabited on the land, and it is proposed for demolition to make way for future development. Historically, there was a second dwelling on the land, in kind of to the east of the existing dwelling, which is why there are two driveways for the site. So the lands kind of in the eastern direction are generally residential. To the northeast, we also have residential land. Directly to the north of the subject site, we have the Aurora Inn. To the west of the subject site, we have the Freeman Auto Sales, and then we have the Esso gas station, and then further to the west, we have Tim Hortons. And then the land to the west is currently vacant but heavily vegetated. So this is our zoning map, which shows that the subject site is located in the general commercial C1 zone, but does sit on the very boundary of that zone. To the east, we have the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone, and then to the south, we have the the comprehensive neighbourhood development R5 zone. So this is our future land use designation map. So the land use designation identifies what the general intent of the land can be, and if changes are proposed, what those changes can be. So the subject site is located in the commercial designation, along with all the land in red, and then the land in yellow is the residential designation. So Municipal Planning Strategy Policy 3.2.2 states that all commercial zones are permitted within the commercial designation, meaning the municipal planning strategy does not prohibit the rezoning if all other policy components can be met. So this is a hypothetical rezoning or resolution map, which would show what the zoning of the land and surrounds would look like in the event that this application is approved in its current form. So we have, I guess, the one area of C3, the remaining C1 zone, and then we have the surrounding residential zones. So this is a look at a very snowy version of the site, where we have the existing building which would be demolished in the event that this application is successful, and one of the driveways has been ploughed here. So this is standing on the very edge of the Kingston Rail Trail, looking back at Main Street in the distance here, and then we can see the Aurora Inn in the background here. And then we have, I guess, standing on the Kingston Rail Trail, looking at the Kingston Rail Trail. So this is standing on the northern side of Main Street, and we can see the Freeman Auto Sales, the Esso, and then the Tim Hortons further into the background. And so this is looking east, standing on the site, looking at the residential dwellings to the east. And again, this is standing on the eastern side of the site, looking at the residential dwellings to the east. So we're kind of on that very periphery of residential, and then we're heading into a commercial cluster. And then this is the Aurora Inn on the northern side of the on the northern side of Main Street. So, in terms of public consultation, as stated before, a public information meeting was not required, but we did still notify properties within 500 feet of the subject site by mail of the application. No phone calls or emails were received in respect to the application, so no communication from the public was received. The application was presented to the Kingston Village Commission for comment on the 14th of May. One question was raised in regards to how stormwater drainage would be managed on the site, but there were no other, I guess, questions or concerns raised. It was mainly just positive comments, but I will come back to the stormwater drainage portion of this comment here. So, when we're looking at policy, we look at the enabling policy, which is set out in Municipal Planning Strategy Policy 5.3.3, which asks that Council shall consider amendments to any one of the zoning maps of the land use bylaw provided the application is for a specific development, which in this case we've been advised is for 2 4-unit dwellings, and is point A, to rezone land to another zone enabled within the same designation. So as stated before, both the general commercial C1 zone and mixed commercial residential C3 zone are under the umbrella of the commercial designation. So further to that, Municipal Planning Strategy Policy 5.3.5 states that Council shall consider in relation to all applications to rezone land, point A, the applicable zone placement policy, point B, the impact of both the specific development proposal and of other possible uses permitted in the proposed zone, and point C, the general criteria for amending the land use bylaw set out in section 5.3, development agreements and amending the land use bylaw. So, in respect to point A that I just discussed, the zone placement policy for the mixed commercial residential C3 zone is lands located in this zone are intended to complement established commercial areas. These areas shall generally be located on main transportation corridors and associated side streets that have commercial development, traditional main street areas within commercial areas that have not yet experienced much development, or areas where flexibility between residential and commercial uses is desired, and to permit both residential and lower impact commercial uses, such as local retail or business offices, in the same area of a growth centre. So, this is, I guess, a map of the zoning and surrounds the subject site, which is outlined in blue. So the subject site is located on Main Street, which is a main transportation corridor, and the site also directly abuts the residential 1 and 2 unit zone. The subject site sits on the edge of the transition from the residential uses to the central business area of Kingston. The intersection of Main Street and Maple Street is the first cluster of commercial development or commercial uses seen when travelling west on Main Street or Highway 1 into Kingston. With the zoning transitioning back to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone to the west of the general commercial C1 zone cluster, which we can see in red here, before changing back into the central business C2 zone, which is in this kind of darker yellow colour here. So we've got commercial, mixed commercial residential, and then back to commercial. So placing the mixed commercial residential C3 zone here in blue would offer flexibility by permitting both residential and commercial uses on the site. So staff consider this zone placement ideal as it would acknowledge the existing residential use on the land while also maintaining commercial provisions for the future and long-term use of the land, and also offer opportunities for lower impact commercial uses to sit between Freeman Auto Sales and existing residential uses. So further to this, when we're looking at what is permitted within the current zone versus the proposed zone, we're looking at, in terms of the existing C1 zone, we would lose the uses in orange, but we would gain the opportunity to use the land for uses in yellow. Sorry, apparently my colour recognition today is a tad off. So we would lose the ability, if this rezoning is successful, to use the subject site for agricultural equipment, parts, sales and services, agricultural related industry, automotive repair, automotive sales and rentals, building and construction contractors, bus and taxi stations, car wash facilities, drive-through restaurants, dry cleaning facilities, emergency services, food and drink production, gas bars, heavy equipment facilities, licensed liquor establishments, manufacturing, outdoor commercial display, parking lots, professional trades, and storefront recycling uses. But we would gain the ability to use the land for group dwellings, multi-unit dwellings containing up to 12 residential units, multi-unit dwellings containing more than 12 residential units, 1-unit dwellings, residential facilities, semi-detached dwellings, townhouses, and 2-unit dwellings. So I will just note that while saying the land could permit multi-unit dwellings containing more than 12 residential units. Lot area still comes into play here, so it doesn't mean that you could have a 24-unit building on the land. It's still dependent on the, I guess, minimum lot area and lot frontage requirements set out in the land use bylaw. Okay, so in proposing the change to the C3 or mixed commercial residential zone, we are looking at offering commercial uses that would theoretically have a lower impact on existing residential uses. Okay, and then when we were looking at a few slides ago, we were asked to consider point C, which is looking at Municipal Planning Strategy Policy 5.3.7, or the general criteria. So, in regards to these, the proposal is generally considered to meet the intent of the Municipal Planning Strategy and does not conflict with any of the municipal or provincial programs, bylaws, or regulations, and there is not expected to be any financial impact to the municipality. In terms of land use conflict, the land use directly to the east and further to the west are residential. The land uses directly to the west are commercial in nature. The land use to the north is commercial but provides accommodation to the travelling public, and the proposed residential units in the form of multi-unit residential dwellings will not conflict with either of these, I guess, as historically the site has been used for residential purposes. The mixed commercial residential zone permits lower impact commercial uses than the general C1 zone. So it's providing a kind of buffer zone and a good leeway in terms of offering lower impact commercial uses while also mixing well with existing residential uses. In terms of the creation of traffic hazards or congestion, the application was sent to the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, who is the body with road or jurisdiction over the road, for comment. They did not raise any concerns with regard to traffic hazards or congestion. They did have another comment, but I will come back to that in a moment. In regards to the adequacy of fire protection services and equipment, the application was sent to the Kingston Fire Chief, and similarly he did not raise any concerns and advised that there would be adequate protection services available for the subject site. In regards to sewer and water services, the application was referred to the Village of Kingston regarding sewer services, as they are the body that provides those services, and they advised that there was adequate supply or adequate means to supply the site. As the site does not have potable water service, the Nova Scotia Department of Environment is the body with jurisdiction over well water, and as the site would be using well under the threshold for requiring a water withdrawal license from the Nova Scotia Department of Environment, it's considered acceptable. So the next point is regards to the potential for flooding or serious drainage problems. So the application was referred to the municipality's Department of Engineering and Public Works, who advised that at the time of permitting they would be requiring a drainage plan, as the current site plan looked to not potentially allow enough space for snow collection when the driveway needed to be ploughed, and also I guess just general non-hardscaped area. So this is, I guess, where potential changes to that plan that was shown at the very beginning might come into play in terms of redesigning the driveway or access or configuration of units on the land to allow for adequate space for rainwater collection and managing water on the land so that post-development flows do not exceed pre-development flows. Similarly, when the application was referred to the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, they also mentioned that at the time of permitting they would be looking at how stormwater was managed and came back out onto Main Street. So I guess there's a twofold drainage water component in terms of it would be looked at before permitting. In terms of the next point, the application is not in any proximity to the Greenwood Wellfield overlay, so no impacts are expected. Again, there's no neighbouring farms, so there is not expected to be any impact on neighbouring farming operations, and the site is considered suitable due to grade and soils. Okay, so just to recap, we received a completed application on the 10th of February. No public information meeting was required, so we proceeded straight through to the staff review. This did include consulting with the Village of Kingston. We're now here at the Planning Advisory Committee. Today's recommendation will be forwarded to the full Municipal Council at first reading, who will then vote on whether to authorise a public hearing. If a public hearing is authorised, neighbouring properties will be notified, and following a public hearing, the second reading will occur where the full Municipal Council will vote and make a decision on the application. And following that, there is a 14-day appeal period of that decision. So, in terms of the recommendation, the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone 836 Main Street, PID 551222279, Kingston, from the General Commercial C1 zone to the Mixed Commercial Residential C3 zone, as described in Appendix C of the report dated May 22nd, 2025. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Perry, for your presentation. At this time, are there any questions on this application? Councillor Gates, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. More for clarification, Ms. Bowman. If they're putting residential, I'm just curious as to the difference between mixed residential R3 or commercial. Is that just to allow more options?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, so I guess I can probably potentially, if with the help of Lorianne, go back to one of my slides here. So effectively, as the name suggests, the mixed commercial residential zone is designed to encompass both commercial and residential uses, and as the zone placement policy described, it's meant to look at providing opportunities for commercial businesses to work with residential uses, which are generally, the commercial uses would generally be lower impact. So as we can see from this slide, we're losing a lot of the uses that would potentially have higher impacts if directly sited next to a residential use, whereas the commercial uses that are maintained through to the mixed commercial residential zone potentially have less of an impact, i.e. business offices, domestic animal grooming, in comparison to something like automotive repair. So I guess they're on the lower end of the scale in terms of considered to have an impact.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions? I have a question about density on the lot. Like how many residential units would be permitted on this lot?
That's a very good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe the minimum lot size is 2,000 square feet per residential unit. So there are a number of other considerations that would need to be taken into account, i.e. where your driveway would go, what the amount of amenity area is, your car parking spaces. So that would all determine how many residential units you can get on the lot. But generally speaking, it would still have the minimum lot size or unit size of 2,000 square feet per unit.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And so it's 8 currently, right? 2 4-unit
Yes.
buildings? Okay,
Yes.
great. Any further questions for Perry at this time? None? Councillor McPherson, are you sure? It is so detailed. My one follow-up on Councillor Gates's question is the process to go from C1 to R3 a different process, or like where you're going C1 to C3, they're both commercial zones. They're sort of more easily zoned into one another. Mm-hmm. That's the right verb. But would it be the same? I'm not saying that's the direction you'd want to go, because I'm just curious about zoning like an R3 in the middle of where you have the commercial and then the R2. And I see Laura has her light on. If you want me to go to Laura.
I'm happy to start, but Laura, if you want to go, that's okay.
Okay, Perry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that that would be defined by the designation of the land. So at the moment, we have the commercial designation covering the subject site, and it does not permit rezoning to the R3 zone per se. So this is the main, or the only rezoning that would allow us to move into a zone that would permit greater number of residential uses while also still being compatible with the commercial entities right next door effectively.
Perfect. And Laura put her light back on. So, and when you say designation, just for, I think, clarity,
Yeah.
you mean commercial, which is the
Yes.
C of the C1 and the C2 and the C3. It's the
Yes.
first letter within that zone
Yes.
that is that designation. So like resource, agriculture. Is resource one anymore?
The resource is N. but
N,
then-
right, it's N. Makes sense. Well, it can't be R because R is residential. So
Now you're catching up.
okay, that's very handy. Thank you. That designation is important when we're considering rezonings.
Yeah.
Laura.
Through you to you, and Perry's answer was perfectly correct. And I'm glad she left the map up on the screen because this is an interesting situation. Normally, well, we have a few different avenues to consider, or for council to consider rezonings. The first is if you're rezoning within the same designation. So if you're going from one C zone to another C zone, which is the case here. We also have a policy that enables, we call it our contiguous policy, where if we had a situation like this, where we see the two designations abutting each other, a commercial designation and a residential designation abutting each other, there is the ability within the other, so right now we're in the commercial designation, we were able to consider bringing this forward to council because it's a C to a C. But if, for example, like under our previous documents, we didn't have a zone that was enabled in both designations, we could have reached into the residential designation to access one of those zones because we have a policy that says if you have two designations up against each other, the properties on either side of that line can be rezoned to any of the zones enabled in either designation, to give that sort of a little bit of a fuzzier line between designations, because we know that there's no line on the ground that says this is the commercial designation, this is the residential. It's an invisible line. It should be somewhat fuzzy to enable this natural evolution of communities over time in the case where we wouldn't have been able to access a mixed-use zone that accommodates both the commercial and the residential. So that's a pretty complicated answer to what you probably thought was a pretty simple question.
No, I think, because I think some of that information was living somewhere in my brain about contiguous zones, and so that it's an interesting piece of property. And then so now I have one follow-up, now that we're down this little rabbit hole. Would the residential density of a C3 be the same as the residential density of an R3? And is not the only difference, but is the main difference, like an R3 would be much more restrictive in terms of you wouldn't have commercial uses on the property. Is it the same density? Is there any relationship between the 3 of the C3 and the 3 of the R3 in terms of what density is allowed?
Through you to you, yes and no. So if you open up the land use bylaw and you go to the list of permitted uses in the C3 zone, Perry always gives us the chart of the permitted uses, but for the sake of space and simplicity, those charts both have 2 columns, the uses, and then and then a column to the right that says condition. And if you go to the C3 zone in our land use bylaw and you go to multi-unit dwellings containing up to 12 residential units, the column on the right will say, go to the R3 zone. Use those regulations. Instead of having the same set of regulations multiple places in the document, this makes it easier when council authorizes amendments to ensure that we capture all of the required amendments, because we only have it listed there once. So we only have to change it once. So, and then that's why you'll see multi-unit dwellings containing more than 12 residential units. That one points to the R4 zone. So same density depending on the built form that is being proposed.
Okay, like a choose your own adventure book for municipal planning. Got it.
I'm going to call this zone that from now on, the choose your own adventure zone.
Choose your own adventure. Okay, thank you so much for that clarification and drawing out some of those policies, because it's helpful when thinking about things. Anything further before we go to a motion? Okay. the motion is that nope, we're not there. That the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone 836 Main Street, PID 551-22279, Kingston, from the general commercial C1 zone to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone, as described in Appendix C of the report dated May 22nd, 2025. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor McPherson, seconded by Councillor Gates. Any discussion on the motion that has been duly moved and seconded? Seeing no lights, all in favor or otherwise, please indicate in the usual fashion. And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Perry, and Laura and Trish for all of your context around that application. And our last item of business today is item D, because C has been postponed, is an application to rezone a property on Highway 221, PID 550-45678, file 24-18, from the residential 1 and 2 R2 zone to the residential mixed density R3 zone. And we have Ms. Alice Jacob here to present this afternoon. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application, again, for a rezoning. The property is located on Highway 221, Centreville. Since Perry explained the rezoning process for her application, I'm going to skip this slide, but I'll come back to it towards the end of this presentation. The only difference is that a public information meeting was required for this application because the property is more than an acre. So the red circle on the map is the approximate location of the property within the growth center of Centreville. And this is a subject property, which is approximately 2.5 acres. The access to the property is from Highway 221. The property has two frontages on the highway. So the property has two frontages on highway. There are no existing structures on the property. The property has a few water features. So there is the Habitant River, which runs through the eastern portion of the property, and there is also a wetland on the eastern portion. There is also a drainage ditch which runs along the western and the central portion of the property, connecting to the watercourse on the east. The majority of the property is wooded, so except for portions in the northwest and the central portions, and also some portions within the wetland. So the proposal, the applicant intends to develop a multi-unit dwelling containing 4 units on the property. The property is currently located within the residential 1 and 2 unit zone, the R2 zone, and the R2 zone does not permit multi-unit dwelling types. The proposal is to rezone the property to the residential mixed density R3 zone to enable the proposed development. This is the zoning of the area. So this is the subject property, which is currently within the residential 1 and 2 unit zone, and the neighboring properties, most of the neighboring properties are within the same zone as well. And these properties are currently developed with residential dwellings. And we have a R1 zone to the south, which is also developed with residential dwellings. And there is the agricultural A1 zone to the north, which includes residential and agricultural uses currently. The future land use map, the property is within the residential designation, and the neighboring properties are also within the residential designation on this map. So the The property has a few water features, as I mentioned earlier. So this portion, the blue portion with the dots, is the wetland. And then the property has has a water course, the Habitant River, which runs along the eastern portion. And portions on a few areas on the east are also subject to the environmentally sensitive area overlay. So I've mentioned this in my previous presentations. The ESA is usually applied to flood-prone zones and also areas with steep slopes. So any new buildings or additions will have to be designed to address the sensitive feature or the unique feature on that portion. And it has to be designed by a licensed engineer. So this is the drainage ditch, a rough sketch of the ditch that is currently on the property, and this is the area proposed for the four-unit dwelling. These are the neighboring properties to the north within the A1 zone. So this is a residential dwelling, I believe, and there's an agricultural use. And this is the northwestern portion of the property, which is relatively flat, and it is on the same elevation as the road. These are the images showing a view of showing the drainage ditch on the property. So this is the drainage ditch on the property, and behind this vegetation there is the neighboring dwelling to the west. And these are the neighboring properties and the dwellings, which is located here on the map, wrapped by the subject property. This is the southwestern portion of the property, which is the proposed area for the development. And we have the neighboring dwelling to the south and the existing drainage ditch on the property. As can be seen, this area slopes downwards to the drainage ditch. And a view of the central portion and also the eastern portions where the wetland and the water course is located. And this is the drainage ditch connecting to the wetland and the water course, and the neighboring dwelling, which is located here. So moving on to the public concerns and comments. We received a few comments and concerns from the public. The main comments were regarding the drainage. So based on the public comments and based on what I observed during the site visit, it looks like the neighboring properties to the south and to the north and to the west are currently draining into the drainage ditch on the subject property. And the public were concerned that the neighbors were concerned that the proposal would affect the neighborhood drainage. Staff reviewed the property records for the subject property as well as the neighboring properties, but we couldn't find any easements allowing the neighboring property owners to drain into the drainage ditch. And also we couldn't find any easements requiring the property owner to retain or maintain the drainage ditch. But however, the applicant intends to maintain the drainage ditch, and the applicant will be required to submit a stormwater drainage plan at the time of permitting. And the drainage plan will have to show that the post-development flow does not exceed the pre-development levels. And the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works has also indicated that they will be reviewing the drainage plan at the time of permitting. Then there were concerns about well water. So there were concerns about the well water capacity. It is important to note that the municipality does not regulate wells, and we do not have any data regarding wells. Wells are regulated by Nova Scotia Environment, which is a provincial body. However, staff reviewed the data of the neighboring wells that were found on NSC Nova Scotia Environment website. We found that the nearby wells met the CMHC, which is a Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation's recommended minimum flow rate, which means that the reviewed wells had sufficient capacity to meet the daily water needs of an average household. But as I said, it's not our position to comment on the well water as it is regulated by the province. And also, it's important to note that the property owner could currently construct a well on the property even without going through a rezoning. There were also concerns about the well water quality. So the neighbor to the south mentioned that they have a shallow well on their property, which tends to turn red during heavy rainfall. So the neighbor was worried that the construction would affect the well water quality. But as mentioned earlier, this property is on a higher elevation than the subject property, and it seemed to be draining onto the subject property, onto the ditch on the subject property, which indicates no cause for concern. And the neighbor, and there's also a well located here, on the neighboring property, and the neighbor was concerned that the placement of the driveway would have an impact on this well. The other concerns were regarding tree removal. So earlier this year, the applicant cleared some trees from the area proposed for the development. There were concerns that this would lead to soil erosion. It is, again, important to note that the municipality does not have any regulations with regard to tree removal. And the property owner could currently clear vegetation on the property even without a rezoning. However, the property owner will be required to follow soil erosion controls during construction, which is enforced by Nova Scotia Environment. There were also concerns about privacy and maintenance. The neighbors were concerned that the development would impact views from their backyard, and they also discussed restrictive covenants. Again, the municipality does not impose or enforce restrictive covenants. And then there were questions about the design, the number of units, the types of units, the ownership, potential impacts of rental units on property values. And there were concerns that the rental units are less likely to be maintained compared to owner-occupied units. So the municipality does not regulate ownership of units. The types of units are determined by the zoning of a property, and the owner could have rental units even without a rezoning. Additionally, there were also questions about the impact of the rezoning on sewer system and also misconceptions about the environmentally sensitive area overlay. Public recommended that the overlay should include setback requirements, which is not included within the ESA overlay currently. And there were some attendees who were in support of the application as well. So this is the policy that enables council to consider rezoning the property. So it enables council to consider rezoning land from one zone enabled in a designation to another enabled within the same designation. So these are the various zones permitted. I'm sorry, that's the wrong policy. This is for the commercial designation. So both the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone and the residential mixed density R3 zone are permitted within the residential designation. As a result, council is able to consider the application. And this is the additional policy that applies to all rezoning applications. So criterion A of the policy, council has to be satisfied that it would be appropriate to place the proposed zone on the subject property. That is, if the intent of the proposed zone is met through this rezoning. And this is the intent of the residential mixed density R3 zone, the proposed zone for the subject property, which states lands located in the zone are intended to provide a transition between areas of low and high density or on properties that would benefit from flexible development options, including a diversity of building forms. The zone is intended to include residential units in a variety of building types at a density consistent with the residential 1 unit R1 and the 1 and 2 unit R2 zones. So it is staff's opinion that the property benefits from flexibility offered by the residential mixed density R3 zone, because there are a few constraints on the property that potentially limit the development potential on the property. So as I mentioned earlier, the property currently has a watercourse, the Habitant River, and any development on the property will be required to maintain a 50 feet watercourse separation distance from this watercourse, so 50 feet on either side. And there is also a wetland on this property. Development is not restricted on wetlands. Wetlands are regulated by Nova Scotia Environment, a provincial body. Any alterations to a wetland would require their approval and would have to follow the provincial requirements. And it may also be challenging to develop on a wetland. And the other constraint is that the property has a drainage ditch, which might further limit development potential on the property. The property, as I mentioned, has about 2.5 acres area, which means that solely based on the area, not considering any other constraints, the property could potentially have 54 units. But because of all these constraints, because of the water features that are currently on the property, it may not be possible to develop 54 units, and the R3 zone would offer flexibility by permitting multi-unit dwellings. So it is staff's opinion that the property could benefit from flexible development options offered by the R3 rezoning. And criterion B of policy 5.3.5, Council has to be satisfied that the impact of the proposed development and other possible uses within the proposed zone are appropriate and acceptable. So the current zoning, which is the R2 zone, and the proposed zone, the R3 zone, both zones permit the same types of non-residential uses. But when it comes to residential uses, the R2 zone permits one-unit dwellings, 2 units, semi-detached dwellings, and group dwellings. All these uses are also permitted within the R3 zone. Additionally, the R3 zone permits other housing types like townhouses and multi-unit dwellings, and also residential facilities. The rezoning from the R2 to the R3 does not really affect the density. So density is the number of units that you could have on a given area. So on the subject property, as I mentioned, not considering any other constraints, the property owner could currently have about 54 units just based on the lot area. And these could be developed through group dwellings in the current zone, or it could be developed through multi-unit dwellings or townhouses or group dwellings in the proposed R3 zone. So these are the requirements for group dwellings within the current zone, the R2 zone, and the multi-unit dwellings within the proposed R3 zone. The requirements are largely similar, except for the side setback. So for multi-unit dwellings in the R3 zone, there is a higher setback requirement of 10 feet compared to 4 feet for group dwellings. And then with regards to amenity areas, group dwellings do not require amenity areas, but for multi-unit dwellings, if there's 5 or more units within a dwelling, there is a requirement for amenity area. And for group dwellings, we do not require a solid waste storage space, but for multi-units, a separate space for solid waste storage is required. And with regards to parking, if there's more than 6 units within the multi-unit dwelling, there is an additional parking requirement. So as I mentioned, currently the 54 units could be developed through group dwellings in the R2 zone, which is the current zoning of the property. But the proposal here is for a 4-unit dwelling. So currently, the 4 units could be developed through a group dwelling. It could be a group of 4 1-unit dwellings, or it could be a group of 2 2-unit dwellings on the property. And as we can see here, there's a lot more area on this property, which means it could potentially accommodate a lot more units on the property. So the applicant is not just limited to 4 units. And this is a proposed zone, multi-unit dwelling. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. So the multi-unit dwellings could be developed as a townhouse style or as a multi-unit dwelling on the property. And this is the flexibility that the applicant is looking for. So they are seeking flexibility because in their experience, building a 4-plex is more economical than building two duplexes. And criteria C, council has to be satisfied that the proposal meets the general policy. And this is the general policy. The application was reviewed against the various criteria listed here. It was found to be consistent with the intent of the municipal planning strategy. There are no conflicts with any municipal or provincial programs, bylaws, or regulations. There is no financial impact on the municipality. The development will be compatible with the surrounding residential uses. With regards to proximity to schools and recreation, there are community facilities and recreational facilities in the area. But schools, the nearby schools are in North Kentville and I believe Canning. But the proposed development, staff expect that the recreational and educational facilities are adequate. With regards to sewer, the municipality's engineering department did not indicate any concerns, and they mentioned that there is sewer on Highway 221, which could provide, which the development could be connected to. And with regard to water, the property, the area currently does not have any municipal water services, so it will have to be well water, which is regulated by Nova Scotia Environment. And potential for flooding or serious drainage problems, the applicant will be required to submit a stormwater drainage plan at the time of permitting, and the drainage plan will have to show that the post-development flow does not exceed the pre-development flow. With regards to soil erosion, siltation of watercourses, again, the property owner will have to follow the soil erosion guidelines, which are enforced by Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change, and negative impacts on nearby wetlands. The property, as I mentioned, has a wetland on the eastern portion, but the development is proposed on the southwestern portion, which is away from the wetlands. If they are planning to make any alterations to the wetlands, they would have to follow the provincial regulations and get an approval from the province. And with regard to site suitability, the site is more suitable, they would have to follow the municipal and the provincial requirements with regards to proximity to the watercourse and the wetlands and the wetland. So this is the process here. We received the application, I believe, in November, and a public information meeting for the application was held in February 5th in the Centreville Community Hall. Staff reviewed the application, and we are currently at the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. And if Planning Advisory Committee makes a positive recommendation to Council, Council will give the application a first reading, and the application will be forwarded to a public hearing. Properties within 500 feet will be notified of the public hearing, and the public hearing will be in the council chambers. And soon after the public hearing, the application will go back to council for a second reading, and a decision will be made, which will be advertised on the website, on the municipal website, and the application will move on to a 14-day appeal period. So based on our review, staff are forwarding a positive recommendation to the Planning Advisory Committee. And that concludes my presentation. I pass it back to the chair.
Thank you, Alice. That was a long one, a detailed one. Thank you for that presentation. We have a couple questions, which will begin with Councillor McPherson. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Do you mind going back to the slide that shows the drainage ditch and the wetland waterway on the east side, please? Thank you. So evidently this is a complex piece of land. It is designated, at least part is designated as being environmentally sensitive, to my understanding. It's showing on the east side of the land, kind of the Habitat River and the wetland portion. It's showing the drainage ditch on the west end. You'll notice the cul-de-sac on Morris Drive on the lower part of the image. My understanding is that whole area is susceptible to drainage issues and flooding, and historically has had significant problems around that. My question is, if I'm understanding properly, that as a municipal council, we will go through a process that you clearly outlined, resulting in a decision by council as to whether or not we will support the application from a change from an R2 to an R3 designation for the property. Is that accurate? So if we make that decision and we were to support the application, then that would permit a 4-unit development up to 52 units. However, that would also be dependent on meeting the requirements and standards of the Department of Environment, who would come in at a later date after we make our decision. Is that accurate? Council would first make the decision as to whether or not we support the zoning request, change of zoning request. Once that's done, then the developer would potentially seek a permit. And at that time, the Department of Environment would get involved to view the property and to ensure that whatever the proposal for the development meets the environmental concerns or restrictions of the property. Am I accurate on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll try to answer as best as I can. So I reached out to the Department of Environment, Nova Scotia Department of Environment, regarding the wetland. They did not make any specific comments about the application, but they mentioned that if there is any alteration to or adjacent to the wetland, which could include like drainage, like creating new drainage onto the wetland, or like infill or any other activities that could change the character of the wetland, then then the applicant would have to get an approval from them. They would have to contact them, but that is not something that we would consider at the rezoning stage. I believe maybe Trish or Laura could further add to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Trish. In my mind, it's like a chicken and egg. Like at what point is it like we approve the rezoning and then it's environment, or the environment is required for the rezoning?
That's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right. Don't have the answer to that, chicken and the egg. But through you, Madam Chair, so I think the confusion, again, is the continued confusion of what does an ESA really do on the property from a municipal perspective? And it does seem to cause confusion in the public. An ESA is an overlay. So it's not a zone, it's an overlay. So it's informing the public and ultimately the development officer, are there additional engineering requirements in order to do anything within that area? So ESA is not limiting development in any way. It's just adding additional controls and oversight on the design of whatever it is that's going in there. That's one. So in terms of the wetland itself, it's not going to be triggered by anything at a municipal level, as Alice has indicated. The closest that it's going to get triggered, I would argue, is during the stormwater management design. So when that engineer designs that pre and post solution to the development based on whatever it is that they want to build at the time of permitting, that's when the engineer will indicate there is additional flow being directed into that wetland. I, as the design engineer, need to reach out to environment. That's when that discussion occurs.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's my question. It's evident that it is a complex piece of land. It's evident that it's already been designated as environmentally friendly. It's evident that there are 2 and probably 3 water sources that are feeding onto that property, one on the east, one on the west, and the drainage ditch itself. It just seems suspect to me, and I'm not pointing fingers anywhere because I know that we have policies that we must follow, but we're also aware that this is a highly sensitive piece of land and may not be appropriate for the type of building that is applied to happen there. And I'm just trying to pinpoint at what point a decision is made as to whether or not there are environmental restrictions that prevent. Is it after the zone or the overlay is complete and council gives approval for an R3 zoning, and then the developer makes a permit request? Is it at that point that the engineer, or is it at that point that the Department of Environment, or is it at that point that whomever will come in and say, okay, yes, it is now zoned R3. However, here's the 50-foot easement, or 50-foot, what's the term? Pullback. Separations that's required. Here's the drainage ditch, and the fact that that is essential for this piece of property and cannot be touched. Plus, we have this proneness to flooding anyway from the other area. When is all that happening? At the end?
Well, it depends on the perspective. Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. So, again, development is permitted right now under R2. Almost everything that's permitted in the R2 is not triggering a stormwater management design at all. So, no discussion at all. So, development could come in. So, if current owner, future owner, comes in and says, I'm zoned R2, I'm allowed under the zoning to apply for a building permit for a semi, so a side-by-side 2-unit. We will issue that permit, provided they can clearly show to us on a site plan, you can meet the setbacks, and there's plenty of land there to meet a 2-unit, so meet the setbacks. Ditches, there are no setback requirements from a ditch, the drainage ditch. There is the separation distance, and we keep saying separation distance. So why that's important is the separation distance under the MGA does not qualify for a variance. So if we say it's 50 feet, it's 50 feet. No variances are permitted. Setbacks qualify for a variance, so that you could see a reduction in those numbers. Separation, you cannot. So that is why we try to always correct ourselves. Are we saying a setback or are we saying a separation? So in the case, should this property be successful in getting rezoned, it's at the permitting stage, but a permit will not be issued until those things are addressed. I think that's the ultimate question.
That's my question. Thank you for the clarification. That was my question. Appreciate it.
Good question, Councillor, and thank you, Trish, for that explanation, because it is confusing to us all and the public. So thank you. Councillor Gates, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I just have a question for clarification. If the units that are built are on well, but on sewer, and I may be naive in saying, but how does the municipality collect? If, in other words, if a homeowner is dumping sewer into our system, how does the municipality bill or collect, is my first question, or can they? Because typically we meter the water to collect our fees, correct?
That's not within the scope of my knowledge, so I'm going to look
That's
into
the first question that I had.
Laura's ready to answer if you...
Yeah, sure. Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Gates. This is a municipal sewer system, so we charge our typical area rate on the frontage.
Gotcha.
Right.
Thank you. That answers
So
that question.
the well water comes out of the ground and ends up in our sewer.
So that's how we collect and
That's
connection.
right. It's the
Thank
sewer
you.
area rate, yep.
That was the first one. And secondly, are these units able to be subdivided?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Gates. If the property has adequate frontage and area, I believe it could be subdivided, but I may be wrong, or...
Trish has additional context. Go ahead, Trish.
It's going to depend. Great answer. But it really depends on what built form they come to decide to build on. And then once that built form, so is it a house, is it a semi-detached, is it townhouses? Depending on what they build, where they build, then you would look at fire code regulations, lot frontage and area. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, but the answer is maybe.
Thank you. Okay.
There's always nuance in planning, sometimes, until there's not. Mr. Deal, go ahead.
Through the chair to anyone who has an answer.
Excellent.
Is there a separation distance from a drainage ditch? And when does a drainage ditch become a water course? Or anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I think Laura threw her light on if you want to give that one to her,
Oh, I
Alice.
win.
Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Deal, there's not a separation distance or setback from a drainage ditch. We have separation distances from water courses, and the authority to determine whether or not a drainage ditch is a water course is the Department of Environment and Climate Change. And Alice, through her processing of this application, did check with them on both the drainage ditch and the water course, and they confirmed that the water course is indeed a water course and that the drainage ditch is in fact a drainage ditch.
Thank you.
Perfect. Great discussion. This is one, it's a tricky one, I think. Okay, any further questions from anyone present today? This, of course, will be the last time PAC sees this, and then it goes to council. So seeing no further lights, the recommendation is that Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone a vacant parcel located on Highway 221, PID 55045678, Centreville, from the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone to the residential mixed density R3 zone, as described in Appendix D of the report dated May 22nd, 2025. It's been read into the record. Before I ask for a mover and seconder, Councilor McPherson.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow protocol and comment, but do I comment on the motion after it's moved and seconded
Yeah.
or now?
I will ask for discussion once it's moved and seconded.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to move the motion?
No.
Okay. Does anyone else want to move? And Mr. Deal, seconded by Councilor Gates. Thank you. A discussion on the motion. Councilor
Thank you
McPherson.
so much, Madam Chair, through you, and thank you for that education on protocols. I appreciate it. It's a complex piece of land. I visited the piece of land, and I've seen the waterways, the ditch, the potential for flooding throughout that subdivision on the back end of the cul-de-sac. And the term reasonable and appropriate was used a few moments ago in the decision-making that we need to make when we have requests for changes to zoning of property or development agreements or anything to do with land use. We need to be reasonable and appropriate. I need to say, for the first time since sitting in this chair, I struggle with those terms and whether or not it makes sense for the potential of this property having a 4-unit dwelling on it. I know that there is the right for 2-unit dwellings and probably multiple, but I anticipate that the environmental constraints and restrictions may have something to say about that as well. So in good heart, I am unable to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Any further discussion or debate on this proposed motion? It will, of course, go to council, should it be successful. Mr. Deal.
Under the group dwelling rules, how many duplexes can be put on there? Is it just limited to 2, or is it, I'll just leave it at that. Is there a limit to how many duplexes can be put on?
Through you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned during the presentation, just based on the lot area, not considering any other constraints on the property, like you need the 50-foot separation, watercourse separation distance, not considering any of those, you could have up to 54 units. The group dwellings, 54 divided by 2, how much would that be? I'm not sure, but those many. My math is not
27.
great.
It's
But
okay.
otherwise, you could have like 54 one-unit dwellings or half of that as duplexes on the property. Does that make sense?
So it is a matter of, again, of the built form. It's not a restriction of units. It's just the form in which they're going to be built is the issue.
To you, Madam Chairs, yes, that's right. The only change that's going to happen is the type of housing form that could be built on the property. So currently, the same density of group dwellings could be built. The rezoning would potentially allow for additional types like multi-unit dwellings or townhouses. The density is not changing at all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deal. Any further debate or questions of clarification? Those are still allowed at this time. Okay, no more lights are coming on. The motion has been moved and seconded. At this point, I'll call the question. All in favor or otherwise of the proposed motion, please vote now. The motion carries with 2 against and 3 in favor. Thank you so much. And at this point, I look for comments from the public. I don't think we have any. Thank you for being with us today. So unless, no, that's Perry. Okay. I don't see any more public in attendance. At this point, looking to the future, June 10th at 1 p.m., we will have our next PAC meeting. Well, it won't really start at 1 p.m. because the public participation meeting for the subdivision bylaw will start at 1 p.m. But, you know, directly afterwards, we will have PAC. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor McPherson. All in favor, please indicate now on your voting devices. And apologies, we didn't get a break today. I don't like going this long without a break, but we did it anyway. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, staff, for your presentations and all your hard work. Motion carried. Meeting is adjourned.